Hello and welcome to today's Heartlift with Janelle and Jennifer today. I love saying that. Today's Heartlift with Janelle and Jennifer. Jennifer L. Holberg is the author of Nourishing Narratives. I have to say that again because the minute I saw this book, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Janelle. Excellent alliteration.
Thank you.
The days today.
I know. I love it. I just love this book the minute I saw and set eyes on it. Nourishing Narratives, the power of story to shape our faith. Oh my goodness. And the cover is brilliant. And this book is not coming out until July 25th. Don't know if I can wait that long to air this, but I'll try.
You are so kind. Thank you so much.
No, I'm not. I'm just honest. It's just incredible. And the first line that I saw when I was sent this information is complicated narratives and important failures. And I thought, that's life. That is my life. That is the work I do in my coaching and counseling. And I just want so much to hear your voice, Jennifer. Oh my goodness.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Wow.
And I've spent a lot of time as an English professor thinking about the stories that we are compelled by, the stories that kind of trap us. And obviously in your own work with people as a counselor and as a writer yourself, it's so often that people say things like, I can't imagine, or I couldn't imagine. And that's actually true, right? Then you get stuck, or a story someone told you in your childhood that you were that kid, or you were in the quote dumb group or something. And that is a story then you could never really break out of, even though it's not true. And so I just think there's so many stories that either constrain us, that hold us back, that tell us who we are, that isn't what the Bible tells us who we are. And we have a rich theology that we don't always live into. And yet what we have given credence to in our faith is a lot of stories. I mean, that's how Jesus taught, right? A man went on a journey, a woman lost a coin. He wanted us to think in metaphors. I am the vine. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
And how then does that help us come up alongside these stories and really learn how to interpret better and claim the nourishing narratives and not the toxic ones? So It feels to me like we work in very similar spaces. So
we do. And I really want to be you when I grow up. I already have told you that you're in your 25th year as a professor at Calvin. And that is insane. That's crazy.
It is insane.
I know.
I don't really feel like yeah.
No, go ahead. You really don't feel, you don't look like you should have been there 25 years.
Well, that's even kinder of you. I'm getting to like you better by the minute.
No flattery,
not only
I
did
promise.
have you been enthusiastic about the book, but no, I mean, it's interesting. I was not someone who, telling you a little of my story.
Please tell us your story.
I grew up my father's a career military officer. So I grew up as an Army brat. I moved 9 times growing up. So was always the new kid, and that's a story, right?
That is a story.
And how you live into that story of constantly being the new kid. Yeah. But I also have a story that even though I moved all the time, church was my home. And I talk a little bit about that in the book, that when people ask me where I'm from, even though I'm not really from anywhere, although now after 25 years in Grand Rapids, I do feel like I'm from here. And I have a community that I didn't have in my growing up years.
Oh, that's sweet.
But
that's very kind of God.
Yeah, it is. I mean, one of the parts of the book I talk about as a single person. I think one of the things you always think about is, well, who will take care of me, or will anyone take care of me?
Oh my goodness,
Yeah,
yes.
and especially I'm not from here. My siblings they're scattered in Seattle and Chattanooga. My father lives in New Mexico, so we could not live further apart.
Sounds like my family. I know. All 3 of my kids live very far away. Exactly.
Yeah. So what happens? But then a number of years ago, I fell down some stairs and I broke my foot.
No.
And I couldn't drive and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't, put a pan on the stove. Like that was because I was on a little rolly thing. And I cannot tell you how people came around me. And in the book, I talk about that story about when the friends who tore the roof off to put the man
Yes.
down through. And
Yes.
we often in that story, we think about the man who's being healed. But
Mm.
think about in the book is the ways in which how can we be roof terror offers,
I love you
right?
say roof.
How are
I
we
love that so much.
right? So what I mean that took something for the friends to think like
Oh,
I'm
it
going to be
did.
the kind
Very
of person
creative.
that goes and tears off a roof for this guy,
Yeah, they
right?
loved
I mean,
him.
the man wanted
Hmm.
to be healed, but you need to have a community that wants to tear a roof off for you. And so
Ooh.
I think as we think about stories in church, right? So often there's one point of view that we sort of think through, but there's so many other
Hmm.
stories in the Bible that once you kind of flip it and think, well, but what about those people?
Hmm.
Uh, it's kind of amazing. And I had this community then who I had this lady who was said, my spiritual gift is house cleaning. And she was right.
Yes.
Like my house has never looked nicer
Not
than when
mine.
right. And I had people bringing me food to the point that I had to say to people, you have to stop bringing me food. I have too, I'm wasting it because
Exactly.
it's just one of
My
me.
freezer is but only so big.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And people drove me and
Oh,
unexpected people. And so I think as you think about
I
kind
love
of
that.
that's a lovely story, isn't it?
And it's a
And
beautiful
it
story.
sort of says to you, wait a
Mhm.
second, if you do believe in the goodness of God, if we
Yes.
actually do talk about that as a story, it can't just
Hmm.
be a story. It has to become your lived reality. But it
Yes.
also, once it happens to you, it changes the expectations. So I
Hmm.
think so much of our life is run on what we think is going to happen, what
Oh,
we think
for
should
sure.
happen, right? I thought that person was going to do this
Or
thing.
should show up for me. That person should.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh boy, you're speaking.
Right.
Now you're preaching. That's good.
And so I think one of the things is for us to think about are our narrative expectations the ones that are set by scripture or are they ones that are set by other kinds of things,
Yeah,
right? Whether
that's
that's family
beautiful.
systems or
Mhm.
just selfishness or and the way in which when people disappoint us, that's actually true as well, right? And
Oh,
so
oh yeah.
uh, so anyway, so I would say that my story, of course, is just to circle back. Sorry, a
It's
little.
okay. I'm
This is
loving
giving
this. I'm
you a
like, did
sense of
you
the book.
minor in counseling or therapy? Did you?
It's interesting. And you probably have this experience from your own
Yeah.
teaching, but
Mhm.
I think that being a professor, one thing I really like about it, and I talk quite a bit about my students in the book, and it really
Oh,
grew
fun.
out of a lot of conversations I've had with students over the years, is
Hmm.
it is sort of pastoral. And if you're lucky, students will share their lives with you. And
Yes.
I think that the great privilege of working at a place like Calvin is that we really think about the whole student. We aren't just there
Yes.
to help you intellectually, which we
Good.
are. I
Hmm.
do want you to learn how to write a thesis sentence and transitions and
How
all
to
of that,
do it. Oh, yeah.
right? But I also want to think about you. And I often say this to my students, you're not simply my student, you're my brother or my sister.
Yes.
And we
Oh, they're
have
so
that.
blessed.
That's a thing that's our story, right? Is that
Hmm.
we are both hoping to live into the life that God has called us to.
Yes, that's
And
right.
part of my job as your professor is to help prepare you for that
Hmm.
next step. And really to form habits of heart and mind that are going to help you throughout your whole life.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
as you start to
Hmm.
deal with the difficulties that come in the next step. It's always interesting to me to think about students I have in, say, a senior level course. And, fewer than 10 years later, there they are having babies and
Yes. Oh,
having
yes.
having difficulty sometimes losing children, children that are
Hmm.
born with a lot of different challenges, but just
Right.
children in general.
Hmm.
And you think, and then I see them post on social media or something we've talked about in class or some little thing that they've taken along with them. And I think, all right,
That's
you
the greatest reward ever. The greatest experience I had was teaching high school literature and writing to
Mhm.
homeschooled kids. And I did it
Mhm.
for years upstairs. I have a huge room upstairs and we'd set tables and I had 20 high schoolers and 20 middle schoolers for a long,
Fantastic.
long time. It was very pastoral. It was before I went back to get my master's in counseling because it's kind of what led me.
Hmm.
Because you can't study Romeo and Juliet without talking about deep theological issues and tenets. And it was so rewarding and it was less intimidating for the students
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it's literature and they're in my
Right.
home. And,
Mhm.
I had to stop because my mom got ill, but it's like
Yeah.
still to this day, it was
Mhm.
so rewarding. And Yeah, I'm kind of back there just praying and thinking. So
Yeah.
that's why I say with a little jest that I'm jealous of you, but maybe it's not
Yeah.
jest, it's really truth.
Well,
That
and one of the things I talk about in the book, and the book is really written, I want to be clear, like even though I'm a college professor, I do a lot of teaching in I go out and speak, in Sunday schools
oh
and
yeah.
community groups and things like that. And I think
Hmm.
one of the difficulties in the field of literature itself is that sometimes people feel very put off by it or very
Right.
not confident,
Intimidated.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and like,
Hmm.
oh, I couldn't read a poem, I don't know how to do that, but then they can read the Psalms.
I know.
They love a hymn.
Yes.
They have favorite pop songs. um
Right.
this book is really about giving you better tools to
Hmm.
interpret whatever story it is you come across.
Which is
So
perfect.
when you're watching a Marvel movie, like, that's a story.
It is.
It's presenting you with a whole kind of theology,
Hmm.
anthropology. It's
Yeah.
telling you the way the world works.
Hmm.
And I think, but before, when we were talking about narrative expectations, I think a lot with my students about narratives of romance, for example.
Hmm.
One of their real popular ones is virtue is rewarded. Well, if I'm
Uh-huh.
good now,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And Darcy's coming,
That's right.
right?
Come on, Mr. Darcy.
Right, but I'm not necessarily making the
Mm.
moral choice because it's a good moral choice, or because
Hmm.
it's something I believe in, or because I think it's the thing to do in my faith life. It's because I think if I'm good, I'm going to get the thing I want. And
Yes.
that shows up in all kinds of other ways in our life
A
too.
million ways. Yes. I
Wait,
just do
God,
the right things. Hmm.
I thought I was doing this and
Hmm.
you aren't rewarding me. Well, of course, the Bible doesn't actually promise that.
Oh, wow.
In fact, the
Yes.
Bible says, in this world you will have trouble. But that's
Hmm.
a story we're like, la, 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 no.
Yeah, I don't want to hear
Um,
it. I want to
and
be
so what I
rewarded.
say to my students is, like, choose, because what happens if Darcy doesn't show up? So, as
Hmm.
someone who's never married, the
Hmm.
question starts to become, well, were you not virtuous,
Hmm. Hmm.
or are you not getting rewarded? And both of
Ooh,
those options are bad,
they
right?
are.
Because
Sound a lot like punishment.
yeah. And you also think, oh, well, the story was, though, if I was virtuous, I would get rewarded. So either I wasn't, and if you read a lot of singles, like there was a period of my life that I actually read a lot of Christian book on singleness, and a
Yes,
lot of them have some pretty bad
they
theology,
do. You're right.
because they're sort of telling you,
Hmm.
oh, you're performing and God's going to give you this thing.
That's right.
Well, that may or may not be true. And
Hmm.
then most of your story becomes about lack, not about
Yes.
fullness.
Or what's
And
wrong with
so,
me? Right.
yeah. And so I must have done something wrong. I thought I was doing the right
Yes.
thing. I thought I was living a life worthy of
Hmm.
God, but I never got the thing. So clearly I wasn't. Or I did
Hmm.
everything right and it's God's fault.
Ooh.
And I'm going to lose
Yeah.
my faith because I always wanted this and I didn't get it.
Yeah. So he's not good. He's not a good God.
Yeah. And I'm
Hmm.
like, both of those choices are bad. And
They
they are,
are.
those are toxic narratives that make you
Hmm.
unhappy. Instead of thinking, I believe in a God who says that this God will always provide for me and in abundance.
Mm.
And I'm
Oh,
always thinking
Jennifer.
about, when
Mm.
I get this thing, I'll be
Hmm.
happy. Like,
Yes.
when I'm married, I'll be happy. When I have children, I'll be happy.
Hmm.
Right? And I'm not saying that happiness might not follow, but
Hmm.
it's not, the Bible doesn't promise that to me.
He does
And
not.
it also
Mm-mm.
seems to say to me that what I have now, I'm not I'm not thankful for. And I'm
Right.
always living in a state of saying it's not enough. It's not enough. And so the whole
Absolutely.
second chapter of the book is really taking on this idea of enoughness, because I feel
Ooh.
like so many people struggle, and I see this in my students all the time, that they just don't feel like they're enough,
Right.
right?
Right now, right today, a half
Mhm.
an hour ago.
Yeah, right. And we're told constantly by our culture that you're not enough.
Absolutely.
You're too fat, you're too thin,
Hmm.
you don't do this, you're too much of this, you're too much of that.
You're
Um,
just too much.
or you're just too much, exactly, which we've both heard, I'm sure. So the question is okay, so I hear that, and it's pretty persuasive, because I look at myself and I go, yeah, that is true. I
It's a
mean,
true narrative, I think. Yeah.
I am a little bit, I could use a little less. But that's not what God is never telling me, like, if you do this thing, you'll finally be worthy. Flannery O'Connor has this great line that says, the great scandal of the gospel is that for how horrible we are,
Yeah.
God deemed us worthy of dying for. Nothing we do. And I think every time we start saying, but if I was only, no, no,
Hmm.
no, no. God doesn't say that. You are today, right now, exactly as you are. God loves you. There
Every
is a
day.
sense that, like, I don't have to do it.
I don't, but I'm having a moment. I'm just letting
Yeah.
you know, trying to take a
Okay.
pause and a breath because this message is really hitting home. I'm grateful that you are here
Mm,
delivering it yet again, because it's been a message that continues to come through these last few days,
right.
particularly. And I think is that what you would identify as a complicated narrative
I
or
would.
a
Yeah.
toxic narrative or both?
Yeah. No, I would say that it's probably toxic the most.
Yes.
But it is true, like, okay, there are ways that we do need to continue to work to be more like Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Correct.
But
That's
I
what
think,
sanctification is. It's
right.
every
But
day.
there's
I'm
so
right.
often that our starting place,
Yeah.
or even in the middle of it, is, well, what do I need to do? And I just think,
Oh,
my
mhm,
efforts are really secondary. And in fact, when I think, Barbara Brown Taylor has this great
mhm.
line where she talks about this one hits me, the idolatry of omnicompetence.
Ooh,
Is that a good one?
unpack, please,
The
Professor.
idolatry. So that we love the idea that we got it together.
So
And
competent. Hmm.
and I mean, that's me. I'm always like, nope, we have a list. I have a spreadsheet. We're going to get it done. I am capable. I am competent. I don't need help. I don't need, so for example, when I was talking about having breaking my foot, I am completely independent. The idea
Oh,
that I
dear
had to
Lord.
have that I had to ask all these people to give me rides.
Horrifying.
Right.
I know.
But my idolatry is
Mm,
that I worship my own capabilities.
yes. Yes.
When I talk about my mother died quite suddenly of a brain aneurysm when she was 55, in fact, my age.
Oh, no.
And so it was my first year at Calvin. She was very young, and
So
she was one of
young.
these people, though, who did everything. And I tell the story in the book about how when she died, my parents did the coffee at their church. And a little
Oh.
kid, this little girl, said to her mother, "But who will make the coffee if Mrs. Holberg is dead?"
Oh,
Right?
she's
Because she
dead.
couldn't even imagine
Oh,
that
like,
coffee could
we
be
won't
made
have coffee.
if my like tsunami of a mother was not there to run everything. And so I think there's a whole lot of
Tsunami of a mother. Sorry.
right,
That's
it's true.
fantastic.
But I think a lot of us know that lady, or
Uh,
they are that lady, right?
exactly.
And I think in the church there's a lot of us who were raised, particularly in our generation,
Yes.
to that was the kind of woman you're supposed to be in the church too.
Absolutely. Hands
Like, if
down.
there's a potluck, we're getting it done.
Oh, we get it done and we do it really well.
And
Yeah.
right.
And
And
it's,
best get out of my way if you are incompetent or incapable,
oh,
and
yes.
because you will do it wrong and
Yes.
not as well, and we got
Mm-mm.
this.
I still don't delegate well. I don't play well with others. I say that laughingly all the time, but I
Right.
just don't delegate. It's like I can do it and I can usually do it really well.
Right.
So,
And so
correct.
one story that then is important to me is, like, I'm somebody who steps up. But that can be a
Mm.
really bad story
Hmm.
when so for example, I'm the chair of my department, and I tend to, like, know exactly what I think we're going to do.
Hmm.
But they all have a say.
Do they?
So
Do they really? Do you just
right.
make them feel like they have a
Well, right.
say?
And so I don't think we'll be you're pretty unsuccessful if after a while they just feel like you're bossing them all the time. And
Yes.
also, you don't get all the good ideas. And
Right.
yeah, sometimes they're
And
not the
different
way.
perspectives.
Right. They're not the
Mhm.
way I would have done it, but also sometimes that's good.
Yeah.
And so I've really tried to work hard in my own life to try to
Hmm.
say, I know that that's really important for you to make sure everything happens, but
Hmm.
also sometimes you have to let them and also just learn from them. And it's the same with
Yeah.
teaching, right?
Hmm.
I
Right.
mean, in my classroom, I always say to students, if I don't learn something this semester from y'all, I have failed.
Yes.
I really want you to be
Oh.
more in control. And the way I teach freshman composition, for example, there's a lot of studies that show that if you get a paper back with lots of marks all over it, students don't actually know what to do with that, right? If you write something like develop, they don't know. If they would have known how to develop, they would have done it in the first place.
They would have, exactly.
But they also come with a story about themselves as students, usually, that I don't know what I'm a bad writer.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Right. So
I've heard that so many times. Yes.
So they're already kind of defensive or just don't have a lot of...
Very personal. Writing is very personal. Even academic writing, still very personal.
This was an idea I had.
Yeah.
You're now telling me like not good. Yeah. And it sounds like you're telling me I'm not good. Things that I've done for a long time is instead of giving them written comments, they come in for what I call, just because it's fancy, oral critique.
I love it.
But we talk about, and they've done some work before they come to identify.
Do you red pen ever?
Never. You
don't ever red pen.
In fact, I don't write at all on their papers. So they come in with 3 things they'd like to talk about, and a thing that they liked. So I usually begin by saying, "Well, what'd you like about the paper? What do you think you did well?" So that they have to
Have you graded it yet?
I've read it,
but you haven't graded it.
I read it, and then they come and talk to me, and that's how we.
Every time they write a paper.
Correct. And so they come see me 7 times over the course of the semester, every other week.
Holy cow.
They spend a half an hour with me, and I'll say, so they'll say, well, I think I want to work on my thesis. So I'll say, well, where do you think your thesis is? Okay, maybe they have it, maybe they don't. And then as we talk about something, I'm like, okay, well, write that down. Write that down. And every single thing they write on their own paper. And then we leave with an action plan, but I don't touch it. And they are so much more in control of their own writing.
Oh, that would have saved me hours and hours of
So I have people who ask me when they know when I do it in that week. Obviously, I spend a lot of time, but I also say it's the same amount of time I probably would have spent grading.
True. That's so true.
And maybe even more, because I'm kind of a slow grader.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I tend to overmark.
We're very similar.
And so I and it's just so much better. And
it is. That sounds better.
Yeah. And
it's
also
face to face.
And then at the end, they sort of tell me, they write a little thing on the back of the paper about what I should notice. I always say, at the back, it has to say, Prof. Holberg, please notice how amazing I did X. Prof. Holberg, I would like to work on this for the next paper. And so the papers also sort of flow more into each other, like real writers, right? We know.
Yes, I do.
Like you're asking people to give you feedback.
Yeah.
And so trying to give them and build their confidence and change their story about themselves as writers. So
I love that. I love that so much. So can I read an excerpt? Because
you sure can.
There was a very powerful influence, much like yourself, a teacher in your life. And I want to read it because it is so well written first. Second, because it is so conversational, just so we can encourage everyone that Nourishing Narratives, written by a 25th year professor of English, is going to be very approachable.
Right. Very
approachable.
Book club if you don't, even if you don't think you like literature, this book will help.
You're going to convince.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so that's why I want to sit in your class. I still have the handmade birthday card my 5th grade teacher gave me, an enormous piece of folded yellow construction paper with a big orange bookworm wearing a festive birthday hat, naturally, drawn on the front. Somehow, the flimsy relic of 40 years ago survived the many moves of my childhood and found a snug home at the bottom of the cedar box a great uncle made me as a repository for my treasures. First of all, so sensory, can smell the cedar, can just see it. I'm smiling so big.
I should have brought it out today.
You should have. I know.
I'm sorry.
Send me a picture.
Yeah, I will, because it's.
I love it.
It's about the. I mean, it's big.
I love it.
And she drew, she did it all and everything. So yeah. Anyway, I interrupted you. You were reading so wonderfully.
Well, I'm always the one interrupting, so this is fun to be interrupted. Perhaps it's no surprise I safeguarded it so carefully. After all, it's certainly an unusual year when one is celebrated for being bookish. Celebrated, more importantly, by the fabulously named
Unquanita.
Anquanita
Yep.
Ash. Okay, I'm just going to keep reading and then I'll come back to my
Mhm.
dialogue. I mean, if that doesn't sound like a name straight out of some wonderfully magical story, I'm not sure what does. And Mrs. Ash was magical. Close your eyes when I read this. One of those teachers who becomes an indispensable feature of childhood lore. Goddess of the 5th grade, she strode effortlessly through the halls of Carriage Hills Elementary School, cooler than most anyone else we had ever known. I mean, how good is your writing? It's
Oh, thank you.
so good. Sorry.
No,
My old
you know,
students know how excited I get over. We could hardly get through a reading because I go, that sentence. Oh my gosh. Oh my
that's
goodness.
wonderful. Like I say, like, no, you're my first podcast and like person that I don't know who's reading it. So it's lovely that,
I
you
just
know,
love
your
good
friends are
writing.
very nice, but sometimes, you know, they're nice. So it's nice that someone else,
No, it's such good writing and it's
thank you.
such good reading. And so I'm just going to read this last sentence. One of the
Okay.
most memorable aspects of her classroom was how she handled reading.
Mhm.
To be sure, she read aloud to us each day after lunch, and we had instruction in reading and spelling and the rest. But the great privilege was to be allowed time in the reading tub, an
Mhm.
old clawfoot bathtub that sat in one corner of the room. Its sides were lined with a vibrant red faux fur material whose only other natural habitat appeared to be the dashboards of certain very groovy cars. The tub itself was filled with seemingly endless pillows of all sizes and varieties. So when our work was done, we were encouraged to luxuriate. What a word. Luxuriate
Yeah.
with a book there among the pillows, reading as pleasure and reward. It was an important lesson. To read, according to Mrs. Ash, was not a grim chore of mastering subjects and verbs, but a task to be sought and savored and enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
Now you just wrote 3 full paragraphs. Now this is why I think I'm want to be a writing teacher more in my latter days than a writer in many ways because I love teaching writing.
Yeah.
You wrote 3 paragraphs about that teacher.
Uh-huh.
And 1 full paragraph about that tub.
Yeah.
I mean,
thank you. Appreciate that.
and so good. And yet brought out that theme of reading is a joy.
Yeah.
It's a luxuriate, right?
That's right. That's right.
So
And I do
good.
think, yeah, and I hope that people begin to think that. I mean, I sit on
Mhm.
when I sit on planes and people ask me what I do, and I often just say I'm a teacher. Because when you say you're an English
Oh, that's
professor,
so humble.
all of their sort of bad,
I'm going to say the wrong word. I'm going
right,
to
and oh no, you're gonna correct my
glasses.
grammar, and I always think, oh no, I don't actually
Not worth
care.
it.
Also, I'm a prescriptivist, right? Language is evolving.
Yes.
Oral language is fine. And I'm also just not that.
Persnickety or prude
Right.
or,
I mean, I
yeah.
just think, oh, that's fine. Or they apologize for what they read. And I think, oh, you know
I
what, honey, I
know.
love a mystery.
I love a
And
good mystery.
I love
Right. I love a
and
good
I love,
horror book.
yeah. I mean, and we all have our thing. Like, do you like
Me
a fishing
too.
magazine? That's awesome.
Yeah,
You know, I think
exactly.
as long as you're getting words in your head
Hmm.
and thinking about things, awesome. So,
Exactly.
but I just think that was a very early lesson.
It
And
was. It
she was,
was.
you know, you could be dismissed for being someone who's nerdy, or which I also
Yes.
was. And I was, you know, I was like I say, I moved all the time. And so
Hmm.
I had
Me
taught
too.
myself how to be, you know, friendly. I talk in the
Hmm.
book about how, you know, that was one lesson in my childhood was like, if you
Sure.
want to do something, you need to do it. And if you want to
Hmm.
have friends, you have to be friendly.
It's very
So, you
biblical.
know, taught myself to put myself out there, but also was very, you know, read a lot of books and did a lot of things. And, you know, that can be a little too much. That can be whatever. But to
Yeah.
have a teacher that really saw us and,
She saw you,
right. And she made a
which is
birthday card
beautiful.
for every single one of us. So whenever it was your birthday in class, she made you a special card that day.
She made it.
Yeah.
Handmade.
Yep. Handmade.
Go,
She
Mrs. Ash.
Go Mrs. Ash. And then she even wrote a little poem inside that was
Is
a
she
little
still
book.
with us today?
She is. In fact,
And
I'm
she's
about
going
to
to get a
go.
copy of this, isn't she?
She is. I was
Okay.
in touch with her and I said, I told her about it, and then I'm heading down to help my father. Has moved into a retirement community, so
Oh,
we're in the process of selling the house and things like that.
oh, yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to drive through her town, and I said, oh,
Oh,
so we're going to have lunch in about a week, and
what a
very
full circle
excited.
moment.
I've never
Oh,
seen her. I haven't seen her since the fifth grade, but
no.
she was very excited about that. And the reading tub was like a huge deal. I mean, if you got to sit in the reading tub,
Oh,
it was kind of this big privilege.
of course. I
Um,
can see it. I can feel it. I was a first grade teacher. It
mhm.
would be so fun to have
Yep,
had that. They wouldn't have been able to get
yep,
in now. They would have been so small, but how fun
yeah.
is that?
And
Yes.
you remember back in the 70s that
Yeah.
that fur that was on the
Oh,
like
yeah, for
the
sure.
dashboards. You never see that anymore. But back in the 70s, at least on army
It was all
bases,
the
there were a
rage.
lot of cars that had that. Not my own
Yes.
family, but GIs. I went to
Yeah. Did
chapel
they
with
have the
or
dice
whatever.
hanging as well?
The
And did
dice,
and
the
yeah, the whole
thing. And
thing, the
he
whole
had
thing.
that in the tub, and then like a million pillows. And you got to go over there, and you could take a turn in the reading tub, and it was like a
Oh,
huge
fun.
deal. But
So,
also,
so
it was
fun.
like reading was fun, and reading
Even
was
for those who were
something.
challenged, I'm sure she
Yeah,
probably knew how to
yeah,
do that.
exactly.
Yes,
And she would
exactly.
read to us every day also.
Yeah,
But we just had a lot of language going on. She also would write a
right.
a sentence on the board every morning. Often it was a quote or something from a poem or
Right.
something like that, and we had to find so many words within the thing, and it was
Oh,
a
yeah.
competition.
So
And every
fun.
day, if you had to get 30, you had to find 30 words and then write 30 sentences of your own, generate 30. But it was such a competition. Like
Hmm.
now I think like that's a lot of work,
That's a
but
whole lot of
it was
sentences,
such a competition that if you
right?
got the 30, you got, I think, like a blue star. And then if you got the second, and then the person who had if you could do more than 30, you'd get like the second place winner got a silver star, and then the winner of the day got a gold star.
Oh
And
my,
she had a huge chart on one wall that had all of our stars of
so fun.
how we were doing. And then at the end, depending on how many stars you had, like it was a big deal. So she just had language just everywhere all the time.
Right. So it
And
was very
really,
literate, very, very
yeah.
literate. And I'm sure did you win every time?
I did win quite a lot.
Oh no, I bet you did. I was gonna say you were definitely dominant. I love that
Yeah,
so
I
much.
I did
That's
all
fun.
right. But
And
it's
you did
funny, my
okay for
brother,
yourself.
my brother, who's 2 years younger than I am, who's now an academic librarian, was not necessarily the most interested in some of this stuff in childhood. And he also had her for the fifth grade.
Okay.
And he also was like, oh, and we did the word thing, and we did. And so for him, she was one of the highlights of his.
Yeah, everybody wanted to get to Mrs. Ash's class.
Oh
Of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
Yes. I love
yeah.
that so much.
And she's
Okay.
still, to this day, we're old and we still talk about her. Like we have all these
Of
Mrs.
course. I
Yeah.
know. You're bringing up so many memories, but I want to really stay. I'm trying so much to stay
Yes,
on target. So when I come visit you in Grand Rapids, we can just go out and talk 100 miles a minute, both of us.
that'll be great.
Um, Oh, Heartlifter, we are taking a pause, a time to catch our breath and think about all that Jennifer has brought to the table for us today. Nourishing narratives. Just that word nourishing. Just let it fall over you like a very cool, cool rain on a hot summer day. A narrative, defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, is a story or description of a series of events, or two, a particular way of explaining or understanding events. Well, each one of us is a story. We are a story. We have a narrative, and we live by that narrative. Someone once said, it's like everyone tells a story about themselves inside their own head. Always. All the time. That story makes you what you are. We build ourselves out of that story. We build ourselves out of that story that we tell ourselves inside of our own head. And I think that's just where I want to close today and give us some time and energy and space during our slower paced summer months here in the States to consider and reflect on the story that we are telling ourselves and ask, is this a nourishing narrative or a toxic narrative? I love that Jennifer exhorts us to claim our nourishing narrative and release our toxic narratives. And she speaks how Jesus taught in story and in parable and metaphor. And Jesus taught nourishing narratives. His narratives were not toxic. They were full of hope and faith and love and belief. Yes, some of us have really complicated narratives, right? And we have had important failures in our life. And these stories, these toxic narratives, these misshapen stories that we tell ourselves, these limiting beliefs can keep us really stuck. And I don't want that for you anymore. I don't want that for me. And I am so empowered and encouraged by this conversation with Jennifer to really consider the story I'm telling myself in my head. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Does it need to be rewritten? In my second book, Overcoming Hurtful Words, Rewrite Your Own Story, I lay out a beautiful way to think about rewriting your story and ushering in the beautiful, meaningful life that God has for you and for me. So the prompt this week is the story that you are telling yourself inside of your head, always, all the time, that story that makes you what you are. Is it a nourishing narrative? Is it kind? Is it self-compassionate? Is it filled with grace? Or is it filled with shoulds and judgment and harsh tones? That would identify it as a toxic narrative. I can't wait to hear from you. Please meet me over on our Instagram at Janelle Raridan and look for the post of today's episode where I will be engaging with you. And I would love, I'm going to throw this out and just see if you would do this because I think it could be so much fun. Did you have a favorite teacher? Yeah, did you have a favorite teacher? Mine, Miss Maines, 5th grade. I had just moved here from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was 8, I believe. And she wore the cutest sandals. They were all kinds of different colors. Every day was a different color. And they had beads and sparkles. And I was just mesmerized by her fancy shoes. And she was just sweet and kind. And she believed in me. That's why I remember her, because she believed in me. And so do you have a favorite teacher story like our Mrs. Ash and her bathtub? I'd love to hear about it. Meet me over on Instagram once again at Janelle Raridan, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast and to my bi-weekly newsletter filled to the brim with practical tips, heart-lifting resources, and information that will help you rewrite your own story and live into your beautiful, meaningful life.
Thanks for listening today. It was great having you here. For even more great content and resources, please join the Stronger Everyday online community at JanelleRaridan.com. Always remember, you, my friend, have value, worth, and dignity.